Peace, everybody. What's going on? This your girl Tiffany here, live in the Fed. Live in the Fed. And so don't ask me about my scarf, okay? Leave my scarf alone. But anyways, so tonight is the subject about humans' knowledge is limited when it comes to the universe. Again, human knowledge is limited when it comes to the universe. Now, why do I say that? Let me make sure my sound is on real quick. All right, so I'm back. Anyways, I just had to make sure my sound quality was good. But our knowledge is very limited when it comes to studying about the universe. Let me explain why. Because tonight I just saw a debate with Brother Chris and Brother Inyame. And I thought it was a good debate. But towards the end, it got very intense on Chris' part. Because, Chris wanted to be domineering. But anyways, the debate was pretty good. The topic was dealing with theism versus atheism. All right. So Brother Inyame was coming from the concept of pantheism, whereas Chris was arguing from the concept of atheism. And I think both parties did a great job. I was leaning more towards Inyame, but I think both parties did a great job arguing their points and whatnot. But here's some things that we have to be honest with ourselves about as humans, because there was people in the comment section, of course, arguing that there is no higher force, and they have the right to make that argument. And there are those who, on the other side, that argue there is a higher force, which they as well have a right to make that argument. Now, here's my position. I do believe in a higher force. Okay? And no, I don't have to be religious to do so. Again, I don't have to follow a religion ideology to believe that there is a higher force. However, I do believe there is something greater in the universe, but I have to be very honest. I don't know if there is a divine force or a higher force that we call God that's behind the universe. I don't know. Same way with somebody who's an atheist, they can say that there is no higher force because science have not proved it, or science has not disproved it. Right? However, just because science have not approved or disproved does not mean that there isn't anything behind the universe. So therefore, in your argument, you just pretty much admit that science have not approved or disproved the concept of God. So you were just honest right then and there. Right? So you was honest by saying you don't know. But in the same breath, now I'm talking about the atheist community, but in the same breath, you say that there is no God. So therefore, you operate off a belief system. You operate off your belief system because human knowledge is very limited. Because we don't know what came before the Big Bang Theory. We don't even really know how the Big Bang Theory came about, to be honest. So we cannot say there is or isn't a higher force as far as absolute is concerned. We can't say there's an absolute thing called God or etc. But you can operate that from your beliefs, and you can validate that based on what you have studied. So when you say you don't believe in something or you do believe in something, that can be subjective. So when I say I don't believe in a God, that is subjective, right? Or if I say I do believe in a God, that's still subjective. But in all actuality, I don't have enough knowledge to say that there is an absolute force behind this universe. And once we get to that point as humans where we can be very honest about that, and we can be real about that, then we'll realize that we don't know everything, or we don't know that, excuse me, we don't know the things that we think we know. Once we can be honest about the existence of the higher force, right, we can embrace the fact that we don't know what we think we know. And in philosophy, that's called epistemic humility. It's called epistemic humility. That's when you realize that you don't really know what you thought you knew. And so we have to be realistic. We have to be honest. We don't have all the thorough knowledge. And somebody put, let me see. Let me show on stage. Somebody put, if something cannot come from nothing, then there must be a creator. We can argue that, but again, we really don't know. I mean, but that's a great argument though. And then the other party can say, well, that something cannot come from nothing, but just because that something did not come from nothing does not mean there's a creator. Another person can argue that. But again, we really don't know. But I agree with you, however, but in all actuality, we don't have the definite answer behind it. And I'm saying that because our knowledge is very limited. And as humans, we have not been here long enough to know enough about the universe. Hell, we don't really know exactly how old the universe is. We don't know exactly how old the universe is, right? But scientists say that the universe is approximately 3.5 billion years old. I mean, excuse me, that's the Earth, my bad. Science say that the universe is 13.5 billion years old, approximately. But do we know that to be the exact age of the universe? No. But we just know that the universe has been around longer than we have. But that was something that kind of threw me off with Chris. Chris said, well, what does the universe sustain? He asked, what does the universe sustain? And this is where we can do the research to find out what does the universe sustain. So let's look it up. Let's look it up. Let's look up what does the universe sustain? Hold on. All right, so we can look that up as far as what does the universe sustain. And according to the information, it says the universe is all of space and time and their contents. It composes all of existing, any fundamental interaction, physical process, and physical constant, and therefore all forms of matter and energy and the structures they form, from subatomic particles to entire galactic filament. Since the early 20th century, the field of cosmology established that space and time emerged together at the Big Bang, right? Which is at 13.787 billion years ago. And the universe has been expanding since then. The portion of the universe that can be seen by humans is approximately 93 billion light years in diameter at present, but the total size of the universe is not known. So therefore, what we know so far is that the universe sustains space and time, and it consists of fundamental interaction, physical process, and physical constant. So let's think about it. What about the cosmos? Is the cosmos not in the universe? What about the stars? Is the stars not in the universe? What about the sun? Is the sun not in the universe? What about the earth? Is the earth not inside the universe? I mean, we got to look at all these different things when it comes to what the universe sustains inside of it, right? Let me see. He put the universe is roughly 13.7 billion years. Right. So again, roughly, we don't know exactly how old the universe is, but we just know based on the fact that it's approximately 13.7 billion years old. All right. So therefore, you can't get the exact answer per se of how old the universe is. Let me see. I don't know how they, hold on. I don't know how they could argue against that. The only thing you could say is you really don't know. You don't know. Your knowledge is very limited. You don't have enough information. So you could only go by your beliefs because your information about the earth, about science is this much. This is all you really know. This is all you really know. And as Chris mentioned in the debate, right? He spoke about the quantum physics, and he is absolutely correct about quantum physics. It's very hard to explain it. It's very complicated because the average mind would not understand what quantum physics really is. So it's like the mystery science. You're still trying to figure it out. Only thing you could say is subatomic particles, mathematics. That's really what you can say when it comes down to quantum physics. But outside of that, you really can't put it into simple, you can't really put it into simple terms because it's not that easy to really understand. It still gets kind of confusing, you know? So again, that just shows you that the mind of the human, when it comes to scientific information, is very limited. Even scientists can't really explain quantum physics in the more simple way that the average mind can understand, you know? But for sure, we know the universe had a beginning, right? I mean, yes, we know that there is a beginning, but do we know exactly about the beginning of the universe? No, we don't. But we do know there is a beginning. Now, that goes back to the point that I made. We know that the universe had a beginning, but we cannot say there was a higher force or there was no higher force. As far as in terms of absolute, we cannot say that to be absolutely true. Because now you got to prove it from the objective point of view. But subjectively speaking, we could say, well, there was a creator or there wasn't a creator. And that would come from our subjective way of thinking. Excuse me. That would come from our subjective way of thinking. You know what I'm saying? It comes from our own thought process. But we can't really say that from an absolute standpoint that this is what it is. So that's why I respect agnosticism. Agnosticism basically say we don't know or we do know, I mean, excuse me, agnosticism basically say we do or do not know who is God and if God exists, right? So with agnosticism, basically you get the honest truth. We don't know. So if you deal with an agnostic person, they'll tell you, I don't know. I don't know if God exists or not. I can't give you that exact answers. So it makes sense. Let me see. Um, we also know that physical laws break down at the planet scale. All right. So now you have to explain the physical laws. So explain the physical laws in the comment section, right? And how it breaks down regard to the concept about the universe. Hey, peace, how you doing? But nature points you towards a creator. Yeah, I mean, but still, even with that, that's still subjective. That's still subjective. If you think about it, it may give you an idea that it might be a creator, but still, then you don't know the absolute answer. You just basing it off your idea. You basing it off your subjectivity. So I see what you're saying, but still, with that, that's subjective. Because if that was the case, then, but then you know what? You have various schools of thoughts, right? But the various schools of thoughts understood nature in a different way, or seeing God or the divine force in a different way. You know what I'm saying? So everybody wasn't on one accord. But again, it's still subjective, and we have to be honest about that. Well, everybody's not gonna believe. Everybody's not gonna believe. Everybody's not gonna believe in a God, and everybody is not going to sit around here and say there is no God. You know what I'm saying? Some people believe in something, and some people don't. All right, let's look at the physical laws. Well, let's get into. I'm on my computer over here. All right, so physical laws of the universe. Let's see. Hmm. Let's get into it. All right, so I'm on the American Museum of Natural History.org. Universality of physical laws. So all parts of the universe are subject to the same simple laws of nature that we find here on Earth. Planets, stars, galaxies move according to the same law of gravity that governs the flight of a baseball. And it says light from distant galaxies reveals the same atomic and nuclear physics that we observe in our laboratory. And stellar clouds contain the same elements as the sun, moon, and earth. All right, so let's go more into detail about that. Let's look at the laws of the universe. Let's look at the laws of the universe. So now when you talk about, let me get back to this comment. The physical laws such as four fundamental forces and all other fundamental laws. All right, let's look up the fundamental forces. All right, here we go. So the physical laws, uh, conservation laws. These laws state that certain fundamental quantities like energy and momentum remain constant with a closed system. This means that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed, and momentum is conserved unless acted upon by an external force. Okay, that's one law. So laws of mechanics. These laws rooted in Newtonian mechanics describe the motion of objects and the forces acting upon them. They provide the foundation for understanding how things move and interact. All right. And then it says the laws of thermodynamic, right? Oh, no, I skipped one. Laws of gravitation and relativity. These laws, pioneered by Newton and Einstein, explain the force of gravity and the relationship between space-time and gravity. Einstein's theory of relativity revolutionized our understanding of space-time and its interaction with gravity. Okay? Laws of thermodynamics. These laws govern energy transfer and transformation, explaining how energy is used to do work and how systems reach equilibrium. Laws of electromagnetism. These laws describe the force between charged particles and how they interact with electromagnetic fields. All right, so basically, when we look at it from a physical law, right, or deal with the physical laws, we basically dealing with energy, and also we dealing with forces and gravity. So these laws more so describe forces, energy, and gravity. But we can argue based on our belief that these three things represent God or a deity, right? Represents a higher force. But once again, we'll still operate from our idea of what that higher force is. But when it comes to the physical law, it doesn't necessarily say if there is a higher force. It basically just says that it deals with force, gravity, and energy. It doesn't really say if there is a divine being within the laws of the universe from a physical standpoint. So again, we still operate from subjectivity. It doesn't matter if everyone believes in a religious God. The creator of the universe is not the same as the God of the Bible, Quran, or Torah. And that's absolutely true. I do agree with that. That God is not the same. There's a difference. There's a difference between Abrahamic gods and the God of the universe. However, those Abrahamic religion were used as a way to describe the natural phenomenon. Again, those Abrahamic religion was used as a way to describe the natural phenomenon. And this is before the concept of what we know today as modern science came into existence. This was during the pre-science era that these Abrahamic religion or spirituality pretty much described the natural phenomenon. And you're right, also matter, yes. So basically the physical law deals with force, energy, matter, and gravity. Four things: force, energy, matter, and gravity. That's the physical laws. That's what it's really describing, those four things. All right, now Now, if you're talking about metaphysics, now you're getting somewhere. Now, if you're going to get into the metaphysical laws about the universe, right? Now you're getting somewhere. But again, it's still subjective. However, you're getting somewhere with this. Because watch this. The metaphysical laws of the universe. Law of oneness. Law of attraction. Law of vibration. Law of cause and effect. Law of correspondence. Law of polarity. Law of rhythm. Law of gender. And law of abundance. Now, this go back to the book called The Kybalion. The Kybalion was written by the three initiates. Okay. And it pretty much describes the law, the metaphysical laws. All right. So let's look at the law of oneness. So the law of oneness says the law posits that all things in the universe are interconnected and part of a unified whole. And then you go into the law of attraction. This law suggests that like attracts like, and we attract into our lives what we focus on. Right. And then the law of vibration says this law states that everything in the universe constantly vibrating at different frequency. And then the laws of cause and effect say this law states that every action has a reaction and every effect has a cause. And then the law of correspondence says this law suggests that what happens within us is a reflection in our outer world. And that's pretty deep. The law of polarity, this law highlights the duality of all things, with everything positive having a negative counterpart. So many people will argue that, well, that comes from a spirituality standpoint, and rightfully so, right? But there's a lot of logic to it. But people will argue that, well, that's dealing with the metaphysics, so that's dealing with from a spirituality as opposed to dealing with from a physical law. And again, that's rightfully so. But I will agree with this as well because it's a lot of logic. It makes a lot of sense. So watch the law of rhythm. This law emphasizes the cyclical nature of the universe, with everything moving in a rhythmatic pattern, right? So everything moves in a certain type of rhythm. Okay, so you got things that move like up, down, up, down, up, down. You know, have you seen the patterns going like this? Yeah, that's the law of rhythm. Law of gender say, well, this law suggests that everything in the universe has both masculine and feminine qualities. Now, some people may argue that that is pseudo. That is pseudo. It would be an argument because why does the universe has to have a masculine and feminine quality? Why does it have to be based on gender? Why do you guys genderize the universe? But it's very common in spirituality. When you study Taoism, it talks about the yin and the yang, right? So the yin represents the feminine principle and the yang represents the masculinity. So there will be people in the scientific community or in the atheist community that will argue, well, this is pseudo because the universe cannot be masculine or feminine. And then you got the law of abundance. This law suggests that there is an infinite supply of resources and opportunity available to everyone. And we like to believe that it's true, but is everybody going to gain access to the resources and opportunities? We have to be honest about that too. It sounds very that's wishful thinking. That's very wishful. Laws of abundance. We would like to believe that everybody have an opportunity to everything, right? To gain resources, but it's not necessarily true. And that's the reality of everybody's not going to gain the same amount of resources or the same amount of opportunity. But again, that's dealing with it from a metaphysical standpoint. Let's see. No, they don't represent higher force. They are just physical laws. The creator exists outside these laws. All right, so let's ask a bonus question. Who is the creator? What is a creator? When you say the creator exists outside these laws, who is the creator that you're speaking of? Because now that's where the $1,000,000 question comes in. Who is a creator and where does this creator reside in the universe? Again, I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I agree with you. But when you tell that to other people, now that's where you got to be able to answer the question. Who is this creator that you're speaking of? And where does this creator exist outside the universe? Where about in the universe does this creator exist? All right. I know nothing metaphysical laws that cannot be quantified. And that's true. Yeah, but see, the metaphysical law deal with it from the spiritual standpoint, like spiritual science type of thing, right? So of course it cannot be quantified because again, you're dealing with metaphysical. That means you're going beyond the physical, right? Now you deal with from the abstract point of view. So of course it cannot be quantified at all. Okay. Consciousness is the creator of the universe. Now watch this. Here's another question. What is consciousness? What is consciousness and how do you prove that consciousness exists? Again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not disagreeing with you, but this is the question that you will get. What is consciousness? And how do you know that consciousness exists? Because scientists today are still trying to figure out whether consciousness, excuse me, scientists today is trying to figure out whether consciousness exists or not. Is there a such thing as consciousness? And how do you prove that consciousness is the creator of the universe? Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying that you don't have a point here, but this is the question that is going to be thrown at you, or this is the type of question that people will ask, especially those who are very skeptical when it comes to the concept of consciousness. They're going to ask you, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What is consciousness? How do you prove that? I'm not sure what socialism got to do with this subject matter. I mean, that would be a separate topic that I'll do on another video. So, I mean, I don't see how socialism have anything to do with this subject that I'm talking about. So that would be another topic for another day. All right. Consciousness is our ability to be aware of ourselves and others, to know what color is, what our experiences are, etc. Well, how do you know you have consciousness? How do you know you have consciousness? How do you know that consciousness is there? How? Because you say it's awareness, but do you need consciousness to have awareness? Do you need consciousness to have awareness? Once again, I'm playing devil's advocate. Do you need consciousness to have awareness? And what part of your body does consciousness exist? Again, what part of your body does consciousness exist? And is this the same consciousness that exists in the universe that's inside of you? Is this the same consciousness that exists in the universe that exists inside of you? I hope I'm not overloading with all the questions. Your awareness is proof of your consciousness. So Are you conflating awareness with consciousness? How can't you conflate awareness with consciousness? How can't you do that? Why are you doing that? Why they can't be separate? Why consciousness can't be something different from awareness? Why are you conflating the two? But who say we need consciousness to be aware? Who said that? Who said that we need consciousness to be aware? Why do you need consciousness? Why you just how come you can't be aware without having consciousness? Again, what part of the brain are we speaking of? I mean, what part of the body are we speaking of when we dealing with the concept of consciousness? And is this the same consciousness that's in the universe? Again, is this the same consciousness that's inside of you that's also within the universe? And what part of your body have consciousness? Okay, so what part of your body gives you consciousness? What part of you, because it's the part that you did not answer yet, what part of consciousness gives you the ability to have awareness? What part of your body develops the consciousness for you to have awareness? Now, you guys may wonder, well, why am I asking him all these questions? And don't get me wrong, he's giving out some great response, but this is the challenge that is going to come along with a person who believes in pantheism, right? Or believe in the concept of consciousness, right? Or a higher force. This is the challenge that's going to come along. And I want to say that shout out to Brother Inyame. He did a great job, in my opinion, but I think he was thrown off. I think he was thrown off by the questions from Chris, and also he was thrown off by the question from Solomon. He was thrown off a whole lot because what Solomon did was basically try to trap him up and get him to say his idea of God came from religion. Now, if he would have said his idea of God came from spirituality, and by him being somebody that's studying African philosophy and African spirituality, he would have been able to better answer that question. But he got stuck. He got caught up. He got caught up in that trap. So I think what Soul Mind did, he was a genius on that. So I give him that. And I give him that also the same way he did Chris. I give him that. But yeah, if and y'all may answer that question as to say, well, it has something to do with spirituality and the concept of how our ancestors understood nature and how they study nature. If he would have said, Neil deGrasse Tyson said this, our ancestors were scientists and nature was our laboratory. If he would have said that, I think he would have got away. I think he would have got around that question. But, you know, he was thrown off. So it's okay. But shout out to the brothers. Shout out to both gentlemen. I think they both did a great job, though. And that subject pretty much brought me over here to talk about the whole thing about pantheism, atheism, and the idea of God. And how we have to really be honest with ourselves that we really don't know. Yes, it's the same as the consciousness in the universe. Your consciousness resides in your brain. Okay. Now, what part of the brain are you speaking of when you say the consciousness reside in the brain? What part of the brain? Because there's different parts of the brain. This is what we have to deal with the neuroscience. What part of the brain allows you to have consciousness? Now, that's the tricky question. That's a tricky question. What part of the brain allows you to have consciousness? And how do you know that the consciousness that you have in your brain is the same as the consciousness in the universe? How do you know that the consciousness that you have in your brain is the same as the consciousness in the universe? And what part of your brain allows you to be conscious? I'm going to let you ponder on that. I'm going to let you ponder on it, and then I'll be back. All right. So, Ronald, if you still here, what part of the brain allows you to have consciousness? And how do you know that consciousness is the same as the consciousness in the universe? Again, what part of the brain allows you to have consciousness? And how do you know that that consciousness is the same consciousness as the one in the universe? Again, so these are the challenging questions that those who believe have to deal with. And also those who don't believe, they will have to deal with some challenging questions as well. Now, see, that's where you messed up at. This is where you messed up. You can ask Chat GPT to answer what part of the brain that allows you to have consciousness. That's where you messed up. Because why do I have to? I'm not going to ask Chat GPT. I'm asking you. Why should I go to Chat GPT for the answer when I ask you what part of the brain allows you to have consciousness? And I'm not saying that the Chat GPT is not good or you can't find great information on there, because you can. But I'm asking you personally because you said it. You said the consciousness is in the brain. So I'm asking you, what part of the brain allow you to have consciousness? I want you to be able to answer that. Now you see how that works. Okay, so what's your answer? So what's your answer? Give me your answer. Explain it the best way you know how. I'll tell you what, just put a word out there and I'll look it up. Just put a word out there and I'll look up the word. So just give me one word to explain what part of the brain, if you can. Give me one word. What part of the brain would develop consciousness? All right. My answer is there are many parts of the brain that deals with consciousness. For example, the prefrontal cortex deals with consciousness. Okay, let's look at what the prefrontal cortex, what is that? Let's look it up. Let's get into it. So what is the prefrontal cortex and what is it responsible for? What's the function? All right. You said the pineal gland. Well, you're gonna have to explain that. How the pineal gland gives you the consciousness. Explain that. What do you mean? You said pineal gland. Now you gotta explain the relationship with consciousness. All right. So the prefrontal cortex is this brain region involved in a wide range of higher order cognitive function, including speech formation, gaze, working memory, and risk processing. The basic activity of the brain region is considered to be orchestration of thoughts and action in accordance with internal goals. This brain region has been implicated in executive functions such as planning, decision making, working memory, personality expression, moderating social behavior, and controlling certain aspects of speech and language. Executive function relates to abilities to differentiate among conflicting thoughts, determine good and bad and better and best, same and different, future consequences of current activity, working towards a defined goal, prediction of outcomes, expectation based on action, and social control, right? The ability to suppress urges that, if not suppressed, could lead to socially unacceptable outcomes. All right. He said the conscious community said so. Nice try. All right. And he put the definition is involved in self-awareness, reasoning, and decision making. So in order for you to make decision, right, there's got to be consciousness. So does consciousness actually help you make decision? And would you make logical decisions? If consciousness play a part in your reasoning and decision making, would it be logical? If consciousness play a part in your reason and decision making, would it be logical? I know. You said Baba Haru said so. All right. Green Soap said consciousness does not reside in the human body. Well, where does consciousness reside at? If it does not reside in the human body, then where can't you find consciousness, brother? Where can you find consciousness if it does not reside in the human's body? What do you mean by aura? Describe aura. What do you mean when you say consciousness is aura? Describe that. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like? I'm playing devil's advocate. But what do you mean when you say consciousness is aura? What does that look like and what does that feel like? Now, you say you have to be conscious to make decision, and no, not all decisions are logical. So, are if they're not logical, right? Are decision based on emotions? So, are you going to be able to argue that consciousness is also based on emotions? Because based on what you stated, you said you can make decision, right? You have to be conscious to make decision, and not all decisions are logical. So therefore, this decision can be based on emotions, right? So can consciousness be based on emotions? Can consciousness be based on emotions? And bro, what do you mean by aura? What does that look like? How does that feel? How do you know consciousness is there? Because you say it does not exist in the human's body. So how are you going to find consciousness within the aura? Let me see. The energy around the body is one aura. The sixth sense is the key. So what is the sixth sense? Where's that sense at? Where's that sense at? You said the energy is around. You said the energy around the body is one aura, right? So where it, and then you mentioned the sixth sense is the key. Where is that sense located? It has to be located somewhere. So now let's get into it. You have a pre-knowing trait, right? So this is called precognition, where you sense something before it happens. It might feel like a sense of unease or a strong feeling that unless someone takes action, there could be problems. Sometimes it's not clear what will happen, but you can sense it. So how you able to sense something? Because there gotta be something that allows you to be able to sense something, right? To be able to have a precognition. So where does the precognition come from? Because you said the sixth sense is the key. So that's dealing with the precognition. And where does the precognition comes into play? It has to come from somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. All right. And then Ronald say, yes, some decisions are based on emotion. Consciousness is not the same as emotion. Consciousness give us the ability to experience emotions. So you say consciousness is not the same as emotion, right? And consciousness give us the ability to experience emotion. And how does consciousness give us that ability to experience emotion? How does it give us that ability? Because now we got to explain, how does consciousness give us the ability to experience emotion? We have five senses which ties to our emotions. Okay, so now where does the emotion come in? How do you have emotions? Where does emotion come from? Where does the emotion come from? Does emotion come from outside of you, or does it come from the inside of you? Does emotion come from the outside, the external, or does it come from the inside, internal? Where does the emotion come from? But you guys, again, I hope you guys are following me. You see why I'm asking these questions, right? These are very challenging questions that I'm asking, because one person said that we have five senses which are tied to our emotions. So we got five senses that are tied to our emotions, right? So where does the emotion come from, and how does the emotion operate? Does the emotion operate from the outside, or does the emotion operate from the inside? Nobody knows how consciousness gives us the ability to feel emotion, or how it gives us the ability to experience anything. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. Now, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. That is a great answer. That is a magnificent answer right there. I can agree with you. Now, you see why I say humans' knowledge is very limited. So, all the questions I ask, you came up with this answer right here. Basically, you don't know how consciousness give us the ability to have emotions or to experience anything. And you described that it's called the hard problem of consciousness. That's the best response. That's the best answer that you could possibly give. So if our senses are not tied to our emotion, then what is it tied to? If our senses is not tied to our emotion, then what is it tied to? All right. So you say they are tied to our physical bodies. So do you agree that, okay, so can senses be tied to our physical body as well? If you say emotion are tied to our physical bodies, can senses be tied to our physical bodies as well? But the real question is, did consciousness create reality, or is consciousness just an emergent property of the universe? That is a beautiful question. That is a very beautiful question. That is a beautiful question. And that's something that is got to be researched. Did consciousness create reality, or is consciousness just an emergent property of the universe? That is a beautiful question. That is a very logical question. Now, that's where the studies come in. That is where the research takes place. But now let me ask you this question. What is reality? We talk about reality so much, but what is reality? What is reality? But I like that question though. I think that's a very logical question. And if you ask a scientist this question, that's something they'll sit back and think about and have a discussion on. Right? That'll be the topic of the conversation in the scientist community, right? That'll be the topic of the conversation. What is does consciousness, or did consciousness create reality, or is consciousness just the emergent property of the universe? So that's something that will be discussed, or have to be discussed, within the scientific community. Because I can give you the answer. I could say, I don't know. I don't know if consciousness created reality. And I don't know if consciousness is just the emergent of the universe. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But we have to ask, what is reality? Okay, so the question I asked is, so I asked Ronald, you said that emotion are tied to our physical bodies. If it's tied to our physical body, then what about the senses? Where does the senses fall into place? If emotion is tied to our physical bodies, then where does the senses that we have fall into place? Is it outside of us, or is it within us? Because how is it possible for the emotion to be tied to our bodies and not our senses? That's the question I was asking. So how do we know that reality is not subjective? How do we know that reality is not subjective? How do we know that reality is not subjective? How do we know? Or how do we know that reality is objective? How do we know reality is objective? Because you said reality is the universe. So how do you know that? So therefore, the five senses is dealing with our bodies. So it has to come from within in order for it to be on the outside. Because the touch has to be connected to our brain. Our hearing is connected to our brain. Our taste bud is connected to a part of our brain. Our sight is connected to our brain, right? Our smell is connected to our brain. So it comes internal. Those things comes internal. So in order for them to operate externally, it has to be internally. Okay, I apologize about that. I said the five senses are tied to our physical bodies. Our emotions are generated from our experiences, cause changes in our hormones and other physical processes. So therefore, our emotion operates from within, right? So in order for emotion to take place, it has to operate within. In order for it to happen on the outside. So therefore, it operates within our physical bodies. So the emotion is generated within our physical bodies. Because our hormones is inside of us, not on the outside. And all the other physical process have to take place on the inside in order for it to happen on the outside. Our reality is not subjective. If you drop a pin, it falls, right? The objective, not subjective. So yeah, it depends on where the pin falls. If the pin falls on the ground, it could be subjective. I mean, it could be objective. But if the pin falls on the table, it's subjective. It depends on where the pin falls. But you say our reality is not subjective. But our idea of what reality is can be subjective, right? Our idea of reality can be subjective, right? Because we all have different viewpoints when it comes to this concept that we call reality. We all have different experience based on what we call reality. What may be the reality for this person over here may not be the reality for you. Again, what may be the reality for this person over here may not be that reality for you. Yes, our emotions are internal that we sometimes express externally. Okay, I could dig it. Me and you both can be on the same page on that. But reality is expressed differently. Reality can be subjective and it can be objective because reality can be based on experience. And everybody's experience is not the same. What you may experience over here may be different from what somebody else experienced. Does it make sense? The point is that the pin falls and it falls at 9.8 meters per second square on Earth. Okay. Okay, I can see your argument there. I understand your argument a little bit better. But I mean, that's the objective. With the concept about the pen, that's the objective part of it. But the subjective part of the pen is where it's going to land. Is it going to land on the floor, or is it going to land on a table, or is it going to land on top of another object? Where is the pen going to land? That's the subjectivity. But the objectivity is that we know it's going to fall if you drop it, right? I think you may be talking about perspective and not actual reality. We all may have different perspective about life, but the reality that we all breathe air cannot be questioned. And that's a fact. That's a fact. That's true. We all breathe air. We all have nose. But then the reality is we also gotta die too. So that's the objective right there. We all gotta die. So that can't be necessary question because at some point in time, we all gonna have to leave. We have to breathe air, or otherwise we have no reason to be here. But we can't breathe air without oxygen. And where do we get oxygen from? Other organism. And what are those organisms? Plants. Because plants give us carbon dioxide to where we breathe out oxygen, and we give oxygen to plants. Or plants give us oxygen while we give it carbon dioxide. Right? So getting back to consciousness, do you believe it is emergent or fundamental? That's a good question because I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know if consciousness is emergent or fundamental. I don't know. That's the honest answer I can give you. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think consciousness is emergent or fundamental? I am convinced that reality is fundamental and that it create no, I am convinced that it's fundamental and that it created our reality slash universe. That could be a strong possibility. That could be a very strong possibility. I can't argue against that because, like I said, I don't know. I don't know that to be absolute. So I don't really know. But it could be a possibility. It could be a strong possibility. But you guys, I got to get ready to get off of here. I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate the conversation that we had on here. Thank you for answering my question. Shout out to Brother Ronald for coming through. And shout out to Brother Dunny. And shout out to Green Soap. No, literally, that's his name, Green Soap. And shout out to those who are watching. Thank you for tuning in, watching the channel. Until next time, peace and power elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off. Deuces. And I will keep you guys updated on more topics and more information. Thank you, Brother Ronald, for coming through. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having this dialogue with me. All right, you guys have a wonderful night. Peace.